Hello, everyone. Once again, welcome to our episode 22. And today's speaker doesn't need any introduction, right? Or does she? We are so happy to welcome Olga Mack. She's brilliant, and we are excited to have this discussion with her. And Olga, welcome to AI in Real Life. And please tell us a little bit about how brilliant you are.
Oh, well, hello everyone, and thank you, Elena and Elisa, for having me. And we're gonna be BFFs. You called me brilliant two times in less than 30 seconds. So that's a record for me, and I would like to keep you in my life for as long as possible for many reasons, including that reasons. For folks who haven't met me before, I am a technologist, entrepreneur, and a lawyer. Today, I spent quite a lot of time researching Gen AI and AI generally, mostly in education and access to justice and insurance spaces. Most recently, I sold a legal tech company called Parley Pro to LexisNexis and helped to integrate it. And prior to that, I am a tech lawyer by design. I worked in technology companies my entire life, have been mostly in house, including being a general counsel of two companies. Really enjoy taking companies through milestones such as buying, selling, explaining what they do to some of the scariest regulators, and then explaining what they do to public in general. I really love simplifying concept, telling stories, and making sure that technology actually has face and relatable and consumable for everyone.
That
That's a
was
great introduction. Yeah, thank you, Olga. I was like, oh,
that
this
was
is
very
like, I
concise.
want to, yeah, yeah, I want to know more. Yeah, thank you for joining us today, and yeah, thank you for suggesting this topic. I know there's a lot of talk about AI and ethics, and it's really such a kind of a overarching, I think, umbrella. But I think that today we will try to center ourselves around some of the key kind of things in that space and of course we will digress a little bit, but this is basically I think the gist of our discussion today, that we'll trust you will lead, and also we're welcoming our audiences to ask questions in real time, and we'll try to answer them as we go, maybe after the talk. So this is what we'll be talking about today. We'll start with some of the definitions and just kind of what's even what we're talking about here, right? Talk about challenges and best practices, and I would be very interested in kind of talking about this mythical, if you will, figure or role of chief AI officer or like AI ethics officer, or those things are popping up here and there. This new role within the company, and also, of course, when we're talking about ethics, it's inevitably we will touch on the transparency in AI and what it means these days, and we'll just try to conclude with what's out there, what's next, right? So, and with that, I guess I'll pass the baton to Olga and
Yeah, no, those are great topics. You guys tell me where to start. We can talk about any and all of them. There are a lot of terms, and a lot of vocabulary is still developing. And frankly, a lot of concepts are still developing, not just vocabulary. And this is going to be happening in the next 5, 10 years. What we focus on, what do we call it? Do we have humans associated with it who lead those functions? Does it become part of something already exists? All of those are really important questions that we see folks, grapple with and have fun with, and hopefully have their creativity come up and really in the times like this, it's an opportunity to build a new world. And that's why I use the word creativity. Creativity invites you to imagine the future, a better future than you have present. And with that imaginative better future, build toward that goal. And this is a time in history when you can do that. You can be creative. You don't have to fit in. You can actually build a better tomorrow.
Yeah,
I like that.
I have to agree with you in terms of like even from kind of the legal standpoint. It's very interesting to be a lawyer right now. It's just kind of a general observation. If you have any curiosity, like any, if you're comfortable with the unknown, if you're willing to take that leap to learn things every single day, I think this is a very interesting time. Especially like in the tech world, but even beyond that, yeah, I don't think we're confined to kind of my cousin Vinny scenarios anymore. Just when you're like very focused on something, just one thing, and just kind of, um, you know, um, do not venture into other, realms. So yeah, so with that, I think yeah, I definitely agree with you in that regard. Yeah, so yeah, if we wanted to start without a little bit of kind of a definitions, and I know the data and ethics terms are being thrown around a lot. So just to get us started, Olga, what do you think about like what's your experience has been with how people are using these terms these days? Is there any like consensus around those, or vice versa? It's like what we're even talking about when we bring up data ethics. I
Yeah,
know.
no, this is really
Unanswered
interesting.
question.
Ethics is a very loaded term, and
Mhm.
people struggle with it because ethics is not universal. It's usually constrained to an organization or society. What's ethical in one place may not be all that ethical in other places. Very, very loaded term. It is also a term that is often put together in the bucket with laws and ethics. This is we hear this all the time, and it's very different. I actually like to point out the difference between laws and ethics. Laws is your floor. You cannot go below floor. You go below floor, you get fines, and you get prison sentence, and you get really embarrassing PR issues. This is what happens when you go below the floor. So law is absolutely your floor. You cannot go below it. And every in-house counsel is really good at counseling you around the clear floor. And then they're really good sort of counseling you around the gray area that could be a floor because floor has a range. But ethics is actually entirely different. Ethic is sort of a ceiling, organizational or societal ceiling. And I like to joke that the difference between the ceiling and the floor is your consciousness. That's the difference, and that's how some folks end up with a much higher ceiling, for example, or a much higher standard. Another term that is thrown around because ethics is such a loaded term is integrity. And integrity is usually defined, and you see sort of chief integrity officers
Mhm.
as someone who reconciles companies' hire documents like their mission and vision with laws, and that's the difference between the laws and integrity as opposed to ethics. And they want to make sure that everything they do is consistent with their stated vision and mission that they put out in the public and in their documents and to their employees. And for some companies that's a more consumable way to talk about it than ethics, because they realize that sometimes they're multinational and ethics in one place could be ethics in different places. So those are some of the terms. They're difficult terms. And there's every time you introduce them, you will have slightly different points of view and definitions, and they're distinct and different. I think it's a very important to appreciate those differences. And as those terms get refined in the context of technology, such as AI and many others, ultimately we are trying to answer the question, what is the right thing to do? And those are some of the most difficult questions, and we are faced with them in the age of AI for sure at every corner.
Yeah. No, it's like you hit the nail on the head when during our prep call when you said that there there's not enough words in the vocabulary kind of to describe that, even to name the terms or the concepts or the notions we have to deal with as of today, right? For the past 2 years, the technology the leap that it had ever since ChatGPT exploded November 2022. We all know this date. And today, if anyone lives under a rock, is OpenAI released their latest model O1 Mini, which is supposedly reasoning and uses chain of thought
Yeah,
reasoning.
exciting
So,
times.
and I
Exciting.
know it's literally 2 years. A lot of stuff happened, and that's an understatement. Obviously, everybody's trying to wrap their minds around it, especially
It's really
businesses.
interesting. It's so this question of, the question of the right thing to do is not new. I've been a tech lawyer for a while now in many companies and have had conversations about new technologies. Now they become more acceptable many times, without sort of using words like integrity and ethics and laws. Sort of what is the right thing to do is a conversation that happens with every technology, frankly, for me at least. I like having this conversation and having it with many executives throughout my career. I usually get them in a room and ask them to imagine what do they want to be known for. And I think that's an easier, less loaded conversation, even though it's still pretty hard when you put it this way. And the way I usually frame it is, look, there may or may not be enough loss today, and we can argue about this. And we may or may not be on the same thing about ethics and what it even means. But 20 years from now, the dust will settle. Do you want to be the poster child of why things should be regulated more closely and what humans do when they're unsupervised? Or do we want to be poster children of doing the right things in the unknown and navigating it like professionals? What do we want to be known for? And I think when you put it this way to a normal human, and I really do think that that's the first thing you should ask yourself. If you go to work for a startup or technology company that is doing something new, you should ask yourself, are they normal humans who will do good decisions under pressure? Because the pressure will be there. Then they will struggle, they will identify all the opportunities and how they could possibly get away, but at some point they will reflect on the reality that they have, you know, friends, family, children, and the legacy they want to leave behind is that of good stuff. So
How do you want to be remembered?
how do
Yeah.
you want to be remembered? What do you want to be known for? That is another way of framing more personally, not just let's do things ethically. That's a very cold word. But when you ask CEO, do you want your Wikipedia entry to say he is the reason why this industry is highly regulated because he managed to do every wrong thing when the circumstances were not clear? Or do you want to be something else? Do you want to be a leader in your industry who sets good standards, who works with regulators, with the industry, who educates, who leads? That's important. And if you select the right person to work with, that will be a very engaging, satisfying conversation. And if it's not happening, I think you should also ask yourself if you want to still be part of the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would also like to say that finally, right now, we see the trend where the businesses and organizations and companies who are either already using AI and integrated AI into their operations or planning to, they try to solve the problem of alignment, right? How does this or that AI system, this AI tool align with our policies, with our mission, with our company? And I think that's the right approach because, again, like you said, nobody wants to be remembered as a poster child for, I don't know, a failure of everything. That's how not to do, kids. Look at that. But, I mean, the trend is there. This kind of fascination stage and overhyped everything happened in 2023. Right now, the dust is settling in and people are trying to find use cases. People are trying to look for something that actually works. I mean, people who are there in the long term, just not for, again, the hype and just money, right? You slap
Yeah.
AI on everything, you're going to get funded. But it's not going to last for long. If you're in the business, you need to know that you're not going to get funded simply because you just use AI in your whatever presentation.
Yeah.
But
No,
that's, at least that's the trend.
there's a few things. I mean, you said a few things. One thing you said is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you're a mature organization, you already have policies in place. You don't have to create new policies. You just may need to amend them to the extent they're not accommodating in new realities. And as we see folks in the chat, there are existing frameworks that are useful, the GDPR, CCPA frameworks, all of those things. And the EU AI Act increasingly is useful. The United States presidential order is very useful. There are frameworks. You don't have to start from scratch. I will observe that what's useful with anything that is, essentially a dangerous, equipment. It's a heavy machinery. It's useful to have a manual and a checklist. You can call it a policy and the protocol. Whatever you call it in your organization, it's useful to have a manual and a checklist. If you have a crane, you're not going to allow anyone to just operate it. This person is likely going to be certified. This person is going to know a lot of things about the crane. They're probably going to have a checklist and standard procedures. You go to the doctor, every doctor has a standard of care. That's usually a checklist. And so those manuals and checklists, policies and procedures, existing frameworks are useful. You don't need to reinvent the wheels because we have a new technology called AI. We're going to have new technology coming up all the time in many technologies in your career. And so you take a look at the policies. You likely already have enough. To the extent you don't have enough, you can make small tweaks, and then you create standards of care. You create checklists and procedures, and you train your personnel to make sure that it is all make sense and they all uniformly executed toward that vision. Absolutely. And then I like that the GDPR and CCPA is mentioned, even though this is related to privacy, which is a very different thing than AI, which is a technology. But remember, every disruptive technology, actually the unit of it is usually data. So that data conversation is extraordinarily important. And what privacy issues and ethics AI issues have in common is that common denominator of data. So when AU AI Act was passed, it wasn't actually passed in the vacuum. It was passed on the shoulders of learnings of 2 decades of privacy and data. And that's one of the reasons why it was passed so quickly, is because it's actually not entirely a wild guess that common unit economics of data is very important. And so the talking about sort of developing language, data is going to be where we're going to have more sophisticated conversations. I like what, for example, the data and Trust Alliance are doing. They are developing language around provenance of data, kind of the origin of data, and the depth and breadth of that conversation. That is an increasingly important conversation. This is a good example of where the best practices and vocabulary are still developing and loading, so to speak. And if you are a professional in any part of your career, being part of that conversation will help you propel your career forward and will help you to propel your organization forward to much more mature conversation and, frankly, leadership positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as of today, right, the developers and the companies who work with generative AI and training LLMs and doing this development, they are scared to just blatantly scrape the internet as they used to, right? Because there are consequences. Everybody knows that. So a few years ago, it was kind of free for all kind of thing. But with all the lawsuits coming out, people are starting to think, and it's a good thing. And the data provenance concern and the way how companies look at it even today is again is a good direction. Even just the system card that I started to read, right, the OpenAI's new model, that's literally what they start the system card with, where they we got the data from, and they go in detail of where the what was the publicly available data set. That was the That's the data we used from our partnerships, and they've made a lot. Kind of everything came together in this one. It's very fascinating read. I would urge everyone to read it tonight. Nothing better to do. But yeah, can I quickly circle back on the topic of AI literacy? You mentioned training. You need to train your staff if you're a business owner and you just want to integrate AI into your business. And EU AI Act plainly states that AI literacy is a must. Guys, will penalize you if you don't implement that on the spot. So, how important that is from your point of view, if you're a business thinking about integrating AI or just already kind of working on that?
Yeah, I will actually take a step kind of further, not just training, but humans are increasingly important in the age of infinite machines. And I'd like folks to reflect on this. At some point, we will solve this compute problem. We have a compute problem. It is costly. It is taxing on our environment. There's many problems with it. But historically, we've solved problems like this. Historically, we find ways, more efficient ways to do stuff. So I have enough faith that we will solve this problem. But supply of humans is finite. It's inelastic supply. That makes us humans a scarce resource. And I will ask folks to reflect on that. It may not be true today, but that's where we're trending. And that's one of the reasons why I tend to have this conversation that we need to change conversation from human resources to human capital. Today, our accounting systems treat humans as an expense. That's why we call it human resources. We don't see it as an investment. We see humans more or less interchangeable. We do not report in our Q's and K's and SEC filings the fact that if my force is not ready, will walk out on me tomorrow, my business will fail. And it is one of the biggest expense and risks for most businesses today. So that conversation from human resources to human capital needs to be changing. And we need to see humans as increasingly scarce resource, especially when it's well trained. And we need instead start looking at it as we would look at any asset as an opportunity to grow it, make it relevant, not go bad, and multiply in its output. We need to change the way we talk about it. Once you change this conversation from human resources to human capital and you start reporting on ways you can increase its value, then the conversation around training becomes easier because the quickest way to make any one person more productive or impactful, however you measure it, is through education. And so I would say absolutely training is a big part of it. And again, the vocabulary we use today, the human resources, ch- treating it as an accounting expense is insufficient, sort of in a root cause to have conversation, the more enlightened conversation of how we help our humans thrive in the new economy. And that has to be a conversation of investment, of capital, of assets, and realization that human capital is finite.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think I read somewhere there was the study when the business announced to their employees that they're gonna integrate this AI tool, and the group A and group B, there were different groups were working for the same organization. So group A was told that this AI tool will just help you be more productive and you'll just do more stuff with it. And group B was told that you will learn more. You'll be able to learn more stuff. With this stuff, you'll be able to get your knowledge expanded and be able to I don't know, immerse yourself in some operational and organizational work that you haven't been able to do before. You haven't had time before. And guess what? Group B was more open to embracing this technology, and they were more open to experiment with this technology, which is very important. Versus Group A was scared to use that technology because they were scared to become expendable. Okay, so what if AI just will be doing my work for me? Therefore, I'll be unnecessary at some point. So, as you said, framing how you kind of introducing that technology, right? If you're a business owner, is very important. The wording, even, right? How are you talking about this technology? What does it bring you as an employee, and what does it bring me as an employer?
Yeah.
How it can be benefit us both versus I'm gonna teach this technology what you do, then I'm gonna get rid of you, and that's it. Problem solved. Because that's
Yeah.
how a lot of people view this, and that's where a lot of the fear comes. And with the fear comes this absence of even like a modicum of like desire to even get to know this technology better, or even experiment, let alone experiment with this technology, which is crucial.
Yeah. No, the key fear is that what I call it a fear of standard of living. Will I, in the end of it all, will my standard of living be as good or better? And that's really the fear of every normal adult who has to provide for themselves and their loved ones. That's a natural fear. But when you start looking at human capital as an asset and realize that it is as much because we look at technology as an asset, by the way. That's how we put it in our accounting books. And if when you realize that this is as much of an asset that could be increased managed throughout life cycle, and that you can through education, correct education, not education where you try to make humans compete with what technology is good at, but actually positioning it to be a partner with each other, to complement skills, to be a peanut and butter for each other, to go together. When you look at both of them as assets, as opposed to one an asset, one an expense, then you start having much more enlightened thoughts about where you focus your energy and education. If you only look at humans in accounting as expense, then yes, you end up in conversation just like that. How can I have more of technology and less of humans? And we all know that really good services and products are actually a combination of both. People sometimes want to interact with bots, but also that sometimes they actually crave humans. It is absolutely true. And we also know that technology is good at some things, but humans also are good at other things. And so, again, if you reframe them to be both assets, you will start conversations that are appropriate. Like, what are those assets are good at, and how can we make them even better at what they're good at, as opposed to how do we have them compete? And so that reframing is really useful, and it's an accounting reframing. But the reason that accounting reframing is very important is because guess what? Finance is the language of business. If you change the way you do your finance, you change the conversations in your business and in the room, and you start having appropriate conversations about risks and values in your business.
Yeah, so I think yeah, there's really a lot to unpack here. So when we're talking about the ethical approach to AI in your organization and things like that, sort of like a different components we're looking at, right? So we named data data provenance, right? So to me, using your metaphor, Olga, when you're saying like ethics is the ceiling, whereas the legal framework is sort of like your absolute floor. So data provenance, I feel like, is somewhere kind of hovering in the middle, because there's a certain legal aspects to it, right? As Elena was mentioning, IP, where the data came from, whether you have a rights and the license and the scope of those license grants. And also the other component of that ethical approach within the organization is actually, because I mean, treating human you know developers or human assets, people who actually write this code, just kind of educating them. Because again, if you're looking at the ceiling, what's that, um, where we are in terms of our ethical values, right? And that could be different, as you said. So that's kind of another component. And yeah, so and and definitely education is part of that. So it's a where we as a company stand, what we as a company stand for, right? So everyone has to understand what the mission is and the vision is, and from there you kind of start like framing what your understanding of this ethical thing is, whatever it is. Because I think it also, now I'm thinking, it really depends on what kind of technology you're developing or bringing into your organization to build on top of, right? So it might be some like life critical systems, or it might be something very benign, sort of like, I don't know, text editor, or I don't know. So I think that will also largely affect of how you define, I guess, ethical approach. I mean, of course, there's like this existential kind of a universe values, if you will, like do no harm or something like that. But it's very vague in terms of like what you're actually dealing with, what your product does. So I think, as you said, you really have to come back, like come into the room and say what we're building, what we want our children or the next generation to look at 20 years from now, and how we're going to kind of to define all of that. And I think it's probably kind of a good segue into when we're talking about AI and AI ethics. The black box term is being thrown around a lot, like AI is a black box, we don't know, like we build something, then the model is making its own decision, we don't have a visibility into the chain of reasoning, and then there's some sort of an output, right? So I mean, I would be interested, like, if you could kind of explain, to us and to the audiences what exactly we mean when we say AI black box, and why this transparency talk is so important and so crucial when we think about AI decision making, quote unquote.
Yeah, no, you said a lot of things. Let me kind of address a couple of them. One is provenance. You're absolutely right. In the beginning, it's a moving target. It is. And right now, you're absolutely right. Your measure of sort of provenance in this like more ceiling place, like doing the right thing. But as we educate our legislators and regulator, you're right. Some of it will actually transition into more of a floor, right? And less of a sort of nice to have and a must have. That's absolutely right. That's a benefit of being in the beginning of technology, and beginning is pretty long. You have an opportunity to influence what's like a nice thing and or right thing, ethical, integrative thing, and what is a legal thing that will result in fines and prison sentences, stuff like that. That's kind of the what you play with. That's the interesting part of it. And then of course, somewhere in the middle, there's also PR disasters, something that the public already has decided is bad, and you probably shouldn't be crossing. So there's sort of a lot of space between the ceiling and the floor. The ceilings are high, and that's how we like to keep them. But transparency is another sort of conversation, and we've now had transparency conversations with number of technologies. It's a slightly more evolved conversation, but also evolving. And we have these conversations around black box versus what I call a fish tank, which is very transparent. And we've had this conversation with privacy. It's a very important conversation. On the one hand, understanding what's happening to your data and all of that is very important. And a lot of what GDPR is sort of creating transparency and rights around what happens to the stuff that basically that represents data around you, and kind of giving that disclosure to folks to understand what's encrypted, what happens, in whether it's in transition, where it lives, where it's stored, it's destroyed, what does destroy mean? Like all of those conversations, if you're privacy professionals, are sort of your meat and potatoes of every day. But then on the other hand, you make something super transparent. You make it a fish tank. And we tend to think of transparency as a good thing, transparent government, transparent this and that, transparent leader, all of those things we think like means good things. And usually, yeah, it is. That's usually a positive term. But remember, you make it much more of a fish tank. You make it also security vulnerable because not everyone comes to you with a good intention. And the more transparent it is, the more of a fish tank it is, and you can see kind of what happens in a tank. Well, guess what? If you have bad intention, you're really good at penetrating that fish tank. And so this conversation about transparency is really not black and white. It's really, a conversation of very specific things. You actually need to break it down and kind of think through what you make transparent and how much. It's actually a dance in grays. This is why lawyers are usually present in those conversations, because one of the virtues for lawyers is to dance in grays and navigate those conversations. And so again, some of it is making into laws, and some of it is making into industry standards, and some of it makes it into public expectations. And navigating all of those layers is increasingly important, and talking correctly about it. So yes, transparency is important. That's an evolving conversation. And I would say we need to move away from sort of good and bad, but really understanding how. And one way to do this is developing practice of AI mapping. We very much see that. It's actually increasingly part of law. There's a New York legislation related to employment laws that requires AI mapping. We see allusions to it in EU AI Act. We're gonna see many more AI mapping conversations and audits to understand, to make sure that we make conscious decisions, fact specific decisions about things like transparency, things like biases. They're very important because they're very contextual. It's not always black and white, and you have to balance interests. You need to balance interest of, say, security and privacy. That's probably number one interest you need to balance, but you increasingly need to balance other interests as well.
What is your view on third-party audits, Olga? Companies love them, quote unquote.
I don't know if they love them. It's if you ever been part of any audits, whether it's financial or technology audit, it's an expense. It takes a certain person to love it. I mean, I won't say that no one loves it. I will say that it's a chore, it's an expense. It may or may not be seen as a sort of productive activity, because it probably may not be seen as a revenue generating activity in most companies. And there's sometimes lack of clarity around it. And I think the question was any audit. I've been part of so many audits on financial side, on technology side, on all kinds of sides, on compliance sides. Um, you make many decisions around it, including whether or not you involve third-party audit or you do internal audit. That's always available, or you do a mix of the two. And then you make series of decisions of how deep you go and what that means, how much you involve, how much you spend, all of those things. And in the end, often, unless there's sort of a prescribed industry standard or law, and sometimes there is both or neither, uh, you have to make sort of an appropriate judgment. Sometimes the judgment actually goes all the way up to the board to make a decision what kind of audit you make. And again, this is a judgment call. This is a balancing of factor. This is what judges would do in the litigation. This sort of thinking through what the company's priorities, what requirements are, and what are the expenses. And you can put an infinite amount of money and time and resources into auditing compliance, and you really need to be doing productive activities as well, or first. And so it's a balancing act of how deep you go, how much you spend, and what's appropriate, and what the risks are for you as a company, but actually much more than that, for your customers, for your partners, for probably society generally, for violating laws, for having regulatory conversations, many things. This is why sort of complex, multidisciplinary conversations within your company are appropriate when when it comes time to the audit, because usually, things like, AI audit or any audit will be a multidisciplinary team. It will be a, taxing on the organization. The bigger organization, the more taxing it will be, because coordination itself will be an adventure. And so deciding whether you do a third party audit or not will be a function of requirements and how you as a business think about it and how you balance those interests.
So, Olga, do you think that AI audits will kind of take off? Because now we have this like ISO standards, right? So we've had one in like development, life cycle standard that has to deal with AI machine learning, as far as I know, and the newer one on the AI, quality management systems, right? So, and I think that there will be a new auditor, kind of a new group of auditors who will be certified just to do this types of ISO audits. And like I work in the embedded software industry where like lots of our products are actually ISO certified, safety, functional, whatever, open source compliance. So when this conversation started up about how we can promote trust and transparency and some sort of, you know, trust ultimately, if I'm getting some sort of a product and there is some third party technology in there, I want to know what's in my product. If I have this ISO certification, whether it's self certification or like outside certification, I have, it's sort of like a stamp of approval, if you will. I have trust. I can rely on this technology. I have some sort of transparency. I have a bill of materials, things like that. So I don't know. Have you heard about any AI audits really going on at this point, or it's more of a part of larger like auditing conversation? It's just that AI thing just kind of folds into that for now.
I mean, it is going as required by some laws today.
Okay.
The New York law is already in effect and it's requiring it. I would even say that a EU AI Act requires it as well, because the how do you determine, if you look at the EU AI Act, you basically have four category of of AI impact. Well, how do you determine who determines it? And it's really actually a very specific inquiry and requires answering a bunch of questions. And the only way you can do that if you actually sort of understand and quote unquote audit your systems, at least yourself. So yes, absolutely. I think that will be a discipline. Will it be folded into sort of existing NIST and ISO standards? Likely yes, or maybe not. The answer may be more complex, depends on the industry too, because you will see that your customers will be asking you questions and they will be asking you the same questions. And sometimes there is a sort of a benefit of certification. You can easily answer the same questions to all your customers if you have a certifications without sort of showing your systems. So there is sort of a efficiency gain. So I absolutely think there will be a practice of auditing, and it's going to be a combination of self and third party audits, how deep they go, and whether they give reports and whether those reports are public. Will really just depend on all kinds of factors, whether it's a security risk, for example, whether all your customers ask for it and that makes it much more efficient for you to close commerce, whether your regulators demanded all kinds of things. I definitely think that the cottage industry of AI audits is here. I do think that AI being a disruptive technology and a unit is being data. It's, you can see how it logically could go with all the privacy security audits. That's very logical, provided that additional things that are more relevant to AI ethics, for example, are built in. So you can definitely imagine building on the practices we've been developing in the last 2 decades. You can also imagine a standalone audit as well. I think it will just really depends on what makes sense in terms of expenses and benefits for the companies and for the industry and what regulators require. But yes, I absolutely think that this is here to stay, because it's really hard to answer what's in your system unless you actually audit it. And the bigger the organization, the more complex it is, the harder it is to answer to and to find that one person who knows everything. And sometimes that one person doesn't exist, it's a team of people. And so when you have a team of people, you have to formally, informally audit what you have.
Do you think that person, the chief AI officer, that's the role that just kind of meant to oversee those type of things? Because oftentimes when I look at the job description of of those positions, I'm not quite sure what exactly this person is tasked with, and I understand there's a lot of uncertainty, but just to kind of to put a little bit more framework around these types of roles in the companies. Again, it depends on the business, right? Right. If you're a company like Anthropic or somebody else who just does AI, that totally makes sense to me, for example, to have that one dedicated person with like organization or maybe like cross-functional kind of reports. But if your organization that just deals with other things as well, like is it justified to have somebody like that, like a chief AI officer? It sounds very cool, I have, I have to admit, but like what's the practicality of it? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll take a step back again. And having seen a few technology cycles, I think I've seen a few titles that no longer with us too. I remember distinctly when I was a junior lawyer transitioning from a law firm to in-house. I distinctly remember positions called SaaS lawyer everywhere, and everyone when recruiter would call me, they would say, "Olga, are you a SaaS lawyer?" And because at the time that was sort of the booming industry, that was an AI of its time, I guess, and that transformed the landscape. And now we don't see SaaS lawyers no any more than we see .com companies. When you name things after technology, there's a really good likelihood that they will not stay, because that's a knee jerk reaction, really. That's sort of a, like, let's do something about it. Okay, fine, let's have a human that is responsible for all that. What do we call that human? We call that chief, and then you insert technology of the day officer. Okay, we're done, right? So those titles don't tend to stick. Sometimes they do, like privacy kind of did stick, but I think it's privacy has become a discipline. It's not a technology, right? So I would say pay attention to those trends. You definitely want to know, like, if you see a trend that we see blank officer coming up all the time, that is a signal that it's an important thing going on in your industry, and you ought to pause. And I'm not necessarily saying that you should be creating that position. I think you, as a leader, should think about the future and think through what you have today, whether you have functions that logically will evolve to include that as well, whether you have policies that are already dealing with those types of issues and maybe need to be changed a little bit, or is this really truly a new discipline? So, like I used to say, SaaS is not a discipline. There's contracts, there's criminal law, there's torts, but SaaS, there's no curriculum in law school first year teaching you SaaS. I mean, I'm naturally sassy, but that's not what you want, right? What you want is my skill negotiating, terms and conditions for SaaS businesses. Well, that's different. That's basically contract law. What you're looking for is a contract lawyer who understand this technology. Okay, that's very different, right? So, and then we no longer have those terms. And then some terms stay, like private, like a lot of terms around privacy actually stayed, like chief privacy officer
Mhm.
has stayed. My prediction, if you actually care about prediction, by the way, we're all really bad at predicting. We are not designed to be predictions machines. So everything I predict, please disregard. It will not come true. But my prediction, with all of those disclaimers, is that we will transition to more like data stuff. So somebody who is, because privacy has a lot of data elements,
Mhm.
new technologies have a lot of data elements. We need to evolve in our data conversations, whether it's provenance, whether it is transparency, whether it's biases, all of those kind of, and that's across privacy, across technology, across your entire organization. We need to have humans in the company who understand what happens to your data, your customer data, your partner data, how it all lives, what happens to it, whether it's accessible, whether it's vulnerable, all kinds of stuff. And so, whether it's somebody who has a data in their title or frankly falls into information officer, which I think is a growing important function, I think it naturally fits there as well. So my prediction is that we will move away from technology specific titles into sort of more information data titles. that will be supporting the company as a whole, helping the chief executive and ultimately the board to make the right decision. But do observe the trends, because titles are knee-jerk reactions, and it's really useful to see what's happening in your industry. But you don't have to react like everybody else. You can pause, you can reflect, you can look back, you look forward, and then you can lead. That's what leaders do.
Yeah, and AI lawyers definitely a recent trend that I've seen on LinkedIn. AI lawyer. What does that mean? It's so mysterious.
Yeah, I know it's very intriguing to me, especially yeah. But I think Olga, it makes sense when you kind of describe it in terms of like a more general kind of terms, just to guide your kind of line of thoughts into that direction. Like it is indeed a lot about data, and at the end of the day, yeah, it's like AI, security, privacy. I mean, it all has to
And
do
more to
with
come, like you at crypto, like all of these things
yeah.
are data level conversations. And we can learn, actually, where I would direct folks to learn is actually from, and I thought I would never say this, but I would direct us to learn from our regulators and legislators. They sort of, because we don't usually think of those folks as super evolved. We think that they're sort of behind. But the reality is, we now know the best practices around legislation and regulation. We know that regulating technology is not a good practice. What we need to be regulating and legislating is human behavior, because technologies come and go, and frankly, they're not responsible entities. Even in the age of AI, there's enough humans that need to be responsible. We want to be regulating behaviors, and we want to be building on the system we have, as opposed to disregard them and build new ones. And so I would say that that's where we can learn from best practices in drafting and legislations. We need to focus on behaviors. We need to focus on systems we already have. We need to focus on unifying units such as data, and build on those practices, because the practices from privacy and security are incredibly useful to build on when it comes to AI. It doesn't give you 100% of the answer, but it gives you a really good start, as we have seen with the EU AI Act.
Yeah, these are yeah. It's just it also gets me thinking about all of this, and I know we're getting close to uh, to the conclusion of our talk, but you mentioned bias just a few times, and this has been a very like one of the major topics in this AI conversations, right? So do you really see this is the biggest challenge in whatever we call AI ethics? Because again, biases are so, I think, also kind of culturally loaded, right? And I mean, it's just plethora of things. So we all have them. It's just depending what our bringings are. So again, like, do you think this is one of the biggest concerns that we have, and organizations should look at that as like the like top three challenges when they're using AI responsibly? The bias concern.
I think it's an important challenge. Do I think it's more important than transparency,
Mhm.
or data provenance, or anything else, or security? I mean, honestly, all of them are important. I will sort of pause and observe, as to be biased is to be human, and to be human is to be biased. And what I mean by that is that we operate on shortcuts, and the way we're wired is on historic data, and we know that historic data is biased. And so we have an opportunity with AI to build a brighter future. That requires an awareness of the biases and wiring that are faulty, and rewiring us into the better systems. I think conscious rewiring of the system is important. We can accept where we are, which is good enough place for today, but it could be a better place tomorrow, and measure those differences. And if we have a defined better tomorrow, work toward them intentionally, as opposed to sort of go with the flow. I don't think it's a disputed assertion to say that the systems we have today are biased. You look at who is in leadership, you look who has been historically leading change, you look at what happens to some demographics. I don't think it's very controversial to say that the systems we have today are biased, and the only thing you need to look to know that they are is look at the results they produce.
Hmm.
The bias is there, so we should acknowledge it, look at root cause, and systematically address them. New biases will emerge. The historic ones we're still dragging with us, and we can choose to be, asleep behind the wheel or not. And when you build a brighter tomorrow, you can choose to be conscious about it and address them one at a time. Um, with an acceptance that to be biased is human, and sort of instead of sort of come to it with a judgment place and shame, come to more sort of what can I do today to maybe not necessarily solve from A to Z, but take it from A to B and empower somebody to take it from B to D. And if we systematically do this as leaders in all our functions, we can solve this problem to a significant extent. So yes, I think it's very important, and we can definitely have an opportunity to rewire to systems that address historic biases. Absolutely.
I feel so motivated right now. I don't know why. No, that was an excellent point. A weird question, if I may. Do you think we'll be able to ever get rid of bias when it comes to LLMs? Is that even possible, even on the technical level?
I think mathematically it's impossible to get rid of anything, but we mathematically can also make it approach zero. That's going to be my answer. I'm going to leave you with a mathematical answer. Maybe if we can't get rid of it, for all practical purposes, if it's approaching zero, it's a zero. All of that to say, we should all feel empowered and motivated to not be asleep behind the wheel, because approaching zero is for all practical purposes is zero.
Yeah, it's
That
almost
was it
like,
there.
yeah, yeah, it's like I remember reading a book on security once, and the author was saying like it's a general thought like security is never done. You can never rest on your laurels and say I have security under control. It's like 100%. It's a process. So you start somewhere, when you identify the problem and just kind of, moving along with this, like, maybe incremental improvements and having the process in place, like identifying issues and mitigating them, resolving them as you go. But it's never going to be a complete thing. So you can just kind of bottle in a jar, like what Michelle say, this is my security 100%. So I feel like with fine tuning and tweaking the models and the AI systems and in terms of biases and other things, it's the process that's just going to
Yeah, it's
take
a process, not the destination.
it's
It's
going to
what I
take a
would
long time
describe a
because
Golden Gate painting problem. You
exactly, well,
paint
yeah,
Golden Gate
exactly, it's
Bridge
like
and you start again.
exactly. That's a really good example because it's never done. I mean, Golden Gate Bridge is being painted probably as we speak. Oh, they will start the
It's
cycle again.
always painted as
Yeah,
we
yeah,
speak, and that's
yeah,
why it's beautiful, because
yeah.
it's a process of painting it. There is a reason why it's an iconic
Hmm.
monument in California. There is a reason why it's shiny and meets a standard every time, because painting Golden Gate Bridge never stops. It's a process. If we
Yeah.
care about biases, if we want to do the right thing, it's a process. It's a Golden Gate thing. And in the process, you create a shiny monument. I mean, what a beautiful way to think about biases that is sort of an ongoing struggle.
Right. Yeah, and like going back to your to you talking about the brighter tomorrow and better goals and improvement and things. So what do you think is like maybe number one is just like key future challenge that because we've been talking about challenges that we have now that we've had in the past. So what's that maybe one future thing, that future challenge that organizations will have to deal with in terms of AI landscape? If you could define something like that.
Yeah, no, I actually have some structured thoughts on this. I like to talk about impact. And that's actually, we have some frameworks for impact. I think impact is increasingly the question that every leader and organization must ask. We have not historically asked this question very often. We historically have asked this context in some narrow context, for example, employment law, because by laws we're supposed to ask this question. Even if you, and the question is the following: if I do everything right according to laws, can I still possibly have a bad impact? And that's one of the ways you prove discrimination. One, you can actually kind of show discriminatory practices, or you can show through impact. Here's an employer that does everything right, and somehow they still end up with all white and male. That's discrimination according to United States laws, period. Increasingly, with technologies that could have impact well outside of your country, organization, the world, we need to be asking the impact questions. If I am still doing everything legal, floor, and ethical according to me, ceiling, can I still have an impact that will be catastrophic to me, to my clients, to my organization, to my country, to my world? That's an important question to ask, because the big difference with AI is that its impact is very exponential, and it may be felt by others. And your good intentions may not matter if your impact is not corresponding to good. And so we increasingly need to start asking about impact and think through scenarios and ask ourselves what could possibly go wrong, and what are the chances of that, and what systems can I put in place even with good intentions not to have catastrophic results. And today our companies, our laws, our consciousness, our good intentions are not wired to ask impact questions. And I do think that as leaders, if we are doing any self work, if we want to develop with times and be impactful in the exponential technology times, we absolutely need to take a playbook from impact world in employment law and take it further, so we can think through the impact of this powerful machinery that we are unleashing in our world. It has a lot of benefits, and it could have a lot of unintended consequences. And unintended consequences could be good or bad. And we as leaders must intentionally think about it and have processes in place before we release powerful technologies in the market.
This is, yeah, this is actually a huge challenge, even because like your imagination can run really wild. I mean, in terms of imagining impacts or apocalyptic scenarios, I mean, we have no problems with that. We have all the sci-fi literature in front of us. Decades of that writing, right? And movies and philosophers and whatever. So I think the challenge here is actually like looking at the impact as something more practical and not giving away to these kind
Yeah,
of
right.
end of the
I
world
look. I'm not,
scenarios, right?
and I do not mean in the
Yeah.
apocalypse, like
No, 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 no,
everything
I
will
know. Yeah.
possibly go. What
Just
I mean is in a systematic,
yeah.
structured, intentional way that you would expect a leader to do. And I don't think today we train our lawyers or business professionals to do that. It is at best confound to scenario planning. But I think that art and science of thinking about impact could have a more developed vocabulary, could have a much more developed um, tools and systems and framework to to allow leaders to be much more enlightened. Sure, like I'm not talking about imagine Terminator, and like the worst thing will happen, we're all chased by the guy with a German accent. Like that's not what I'm talking about. I am, as exciting as that may be, or terrifying, depending on your definition of fun. What I'm talking about is intentional, measured actions by leaders who systematically put systems in place to do the right thing.
Yeah. So you think that move fast, break things is no longer should no longer be the motto, just considering how ubiquitous this technology is, like omni use and like far spreading and just scaling so fast.
I think we as leaders need to start thinking about the impact of our actions
Yeah,
and whether 20 years later or sooner or later we'll be viewed as a poster child of enlightened or not.
yeah. That's where we started our conversation today, right? I think it's kind of a good, way to
Full
conclude
circle.
this. I know we're out of time a little
We
bit.
are. We are.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I mean, Olga, thank you so much for joining us today. Um,
I
and yeah,
I said it twice, but can I say it the third time?
third
You're
time is
brilliant.
charm.
You're brilliant, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I genuinely learned so much during this talk. And apologies for interrupting occasionally and just derailing this conversation because I know we had a structure in the beginning. Anyway,
Well,
yeah,
I
it
heard you
was.
too, and now you said it the third time within an hour. We're now BFFs. Always keep people in my life who give generous compliments. I mean, your life can never have too many of
That's
people like
that's a
that.
low bar. That's a low bar, Olga.
That's okay. That's okay. I love to
Thank
have
you
you in
so
my
much.
life. Thank you.
Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Olga.
today
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
and for the comments. Bye.